Imagine waking up one morning with everything you could ever dream of: money, fame, luxury, and endless opportunities at your fingertips. Now imagine waking up in the shoes of someone who has nothing. Someone who works tirelessly behind the scenes just to get by. Sounds crazy, right? Well, that's exactly what happened when the son of one of the world's wealthiest men decided to swap lives with his family's valet for a whole week. What began as an experiment quickly turned into an eye-opening journey that neither of them could have ever anticipated. A week that would forever alter their lives in ways they never saw coming. Meet Tyler, a 25-year-old billionaire's son with a life of privilege that most of us can only dream about. From private jets to 5-star resorts, Tyler has always lived in the lap of luxury. Every desire he's ever had was catered to before he could even ask for it. He had the perfect social media life, always flaunting the latest designer clothes, the most expensive gadgets, and attending exclusive parties. But despite it all, there was something missing, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. He never understood the struggles of those living outside his bubble, the people who made his lavish lifestyle possible, like the ones who drove his cars, prepared his meals, and managed his countless properties. What would their lives really like? And what would happen if he experienced it all firsthand? And then there's Victor, a 30-year-old valet who has worked for Tyler's family for years. He's the guy who greets Tyler's friends with a smile, parks their million-dollar cars, and does everything behind the scenes to make sure the billionaire lifestyle runs smoothly. To Tyler, Victor was just another part of the background, someone who was always there but never truly seen. For Victor, life hasn't been easy. Working long hours with little recognition, he's used to being invisible, doing his job without ever getting a taste of the luxury that the rich live in. His life consists of simple routines, waking up early, working through the day, and struggling to make ends meet. But there's more to Victor than meets the eye. He has dreams, hopes, and a deeper understanding of the world than Tyler could ever imagine. When the two of them come up with the idea to swap lives for a week, it's presented as a challenge, an experiment to see what life is really like for someone on the opposite end of the spectrum. Tyler wants to understand what it's like to live without money, without power, and without a safety net. Meanwhile, Victor is curious about the world that Tyler inhabits, what it's like to live a life of excess, to have every need met, and to experience the things that only the ultra-wealthy get to enjoy. The stakes are high, and neither of them fully understands the profound impact this week will have. From the moment the swap begins, both men are thrust into worlds that feel alien to them. Tyler, accustomed to the comfort of his father's sprawling mansion, finds himself cramped in a tiny apartment, navigating public transportation and struggling to make ends meet on a valet's salary. The harsh realities of life without a trust, fund, or credit card are overwhelming. He has to fight for every dollar, face judgment from strangers, and deal with the stress of a life that isn't as glamorous as he thought. The first few days are a roller coaster of frustration and confusion. Tyler quickly realizes that the life of a valet isn't about just driving fancy cars. It's about constant physical exhaustion, emotional toll, and being at the mercy of people who treat him like he's invisible. Meanwhile, Victor, now stepping into Tyler's shoes, is caught up in a world that feels surreal. He's thrown into a whirlwind of designer clothes, lavish parties, and extravagant events. At first, it feels like a dream come true. He's living the high life he's only seen from afar. But as the days go on, he begins to notice something strange. The people around him, including Tyler's friends, aren't as kind as he thought. They treat him differently, almost like he's an object or a tool to be used. The facade of wealth begins to lose its shine as Victor starts to feel the emptiness that often accompanies it. The luxury that seemed so appealing now feels hollow, and he begins to realize that wealth comes with its own set of challenges that Tyler never had to face. As the week progresses, both men are forced to confront the harsh truths about their own lives, their families, and their views on the world. Tyler begins to develop a deep sense of empathy for those who have to work hard every day just to survive. He finds himself questioning everything he once took for granted: the luxuries, the privileges, the people he thought were beneath him. He starts to see the humanity in those who serve him, the people like Victor who put in the work so that he can live his carefree life. It's a revelation that shakes him to his core. Victor, on the other hand, experiences the isolating effect of wealth. The glittering surface of the elite world hides a darker side, one that's filled with pretentiousness, loneliness, and a sense of disconnection. Despite being surrounded by wealth and beauty, Victor feels more lost than ever. The people who seemed so glamorous from a distance are now revealed as hollow and self-absorbed. As he navigates the pressures of living in a world he doesn't belong to, he starts to yearn for the simplicity and connection he left behind. By the end of the week, both Tyler and Victor have been changed forever. They've learned lessons that no amount of money could have ever taught them. But just as they begin to fully understand the depth of their experiences, they are faced with a difficult decision. Will they return to their old lives? Or will they take what they've learned and make a drastic change that could alter the course of their futures? What happens when two completely different worlds collide? And what do they do with the revelations they've uncovered? The answers aren't as simple as they first seemed. In the next part of the story, you'll see how these two men face the consequences of their life-changing week. Will their bond survive, or will the shocking truths they've discovered tear them apart? Stay tuned, because the conclusion will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about privilege, empathy, and the real cost of wealth. Tyler woke up on the 6th day of the swap, feeling exhausted in a way he'd never experienced before. The cold, cramped apartment he'd been staying in was a far cry from the plush comfort of his mansion. His body ached, his hands sore from all the manual labor he'd done. He had spent hours each day washing cars, running errands, and even picking up trash from the side of the road. At first, he thought it would be a game, a week of stepping into someone else's shoes for a little excitement. But now, with every bone in his body begging for relief, Tyler wasn't so sure anymore. The reality of Victor's life was far more brutal than he had imagined. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion that was getting to him. It was the constant judgment. The people who he used to consider beneath him now stared at him with indifference or outright disdain. He was forced to wait on others, endure insults from people who didn't know his true identity, and deal with harsh bosses who barely acknowledged his presence. When he'd been a part of that world, he'd seen the faces of the staff, his staff, who always seemed so patient, so happy to serve. Now he understood that patience wasn't always a choice. It was a survival mechanism. The first few days had been a blur of awkward interactions and mounting frustration. Tyler had been tempted to end the experiment early, to pack his things, and run back to his comfortable life. But as he worked through the days, something began to shift in him. There was something about living without the constant safety net, the lavish dinners, and the designer clothes that made him feel real. For the first time, Tyler had to rely on his own instincts, his own strength. He wasn't just a spoiled rich kid. He was a human being, trying to survive. And that raw feeling, as unsettling as it was, left a strange sense of accomplishment. Victor, meanwhile, had been experiencing his own eye-opening journey. At first, he thought stepping into Tyler's world would be a dream come true. After all, who wouldn't want to live in a mansion, attend high-profile parties, and wear expensive suits? But as the days wore on, the glamour began to fade. The lavish parties were nothing but empty chatter and forced smiles. The so-called friends Tyler had surrounded himself with were self-absorbed, uninterested in anything beyond their own wealth and status. The fake niceties, the shallow conversations, the endless demands. It was all too much for Victor to handle. He had tried to make the most of the opportunity, but he couldn't shake the feeling that everyone around him was either treating him like a novelty or avoiding him completely. At one event, someone had mistaken him for a new assistant and ordered him to fetch drinks. Another time, a woman had flirted with him, only to lose interest when she realized he didn't share her obsession with luxury brands and designer handbags. It was as if the wealth and status that surrounded him had created a wall between him and anyone who could see beyond the surface. But there were moments when he felt a sense of power, when he took Tyler's place at a private dinner, effortlessly commanding attention in a way he never would have back in his old life. He could see the way people listened when he spoke, the respect they gave him, simply because he was now one of them. Yet those moments never lasted long. Victor began to realize something disturbing. In this world, his worth wasn't based on who he was, but what he represented. And when the money, the mansion, and the cars were stripped away, there was nothing left but emptiness. As the week dragged on, both men found themselves confronting a dark truth. Tyler, who had always taken his wealth for granted, began to see how little his privileged life had prepared him for the real world. The conversations he had with people who worked at the car wash, the restaurant, and the small stores were more genuine and grounded than any shallow exchange he'd ever had at a country club. And yet, despite all the hard work and perseverance these people showed, they lived in a constant state of fear of being replaced, ignored, or unseen. Tyler realized that for all the privileges he'd had, he'd never truly understood what it meant to fight every day just to stay afloat. Victor's realization was even more profound. The life of luxury that had once seemed so alluring now felt like a trap. He hated the way people treated him, how they barely acknowledged his humanity as they brushed past him in their designer clothes. It was as if the money and power had transformed them into something other than people. He longed for the simplicity of his old life, where he didn't have to pretend to be something he wasn't, where he didn't have to smile through gritted teeth and endure the fake pleasantries of a world that only valued surface-level appearances. But despite all these revelations, both men were at a crossroads. Tyler was becoming more and more aware of how his wealth had distorted his view of the world, but he couldn't shake the thought of returning to his old life. It was the only life he'd ever known. Could he really leave it behind, even after everything he had learned? On the other hand, Victor knew he was only one step away from returning to the life he knew so well, one filled with uncertainty, but with real human connections. But as much as he yearned for the peace of his old routine, he was now conflicted. He couldn't ignore the allure of the wealth and power Tyler had shown him. Was it enough to make him abandon everything he had fought for? The last day of the swap arrived, and both men were left to make a choice. Tyler stood on the balcony of the mansion, gazing at the sprawling grounds below him. The house he had once called home now felt like a gilded cage. He had grown fond of the people he'd met during his week of struggle, the ones who had shown him the harsh realities of life outside the walls of his inherited wealth. And Victor, now back in the valet uniform, was preparing to return to his small apartment, but something had shifted within him. He knew he couldn't go back to the life he once had. Not after everything he had seen. Their lives were about to collide in ways neither of them could ever have predicted. Would Tyler walk away from everything, embracing a life of authenticity and empathy? Would Victor finally step into the world of wealth and power, leaving behind his values for the glittering promise of luxury? The answers to these questions were just around the corner. But as the final moments of their swap drew near, it was clear that no matter what choice they made, their lives would never be the same again, and neither could predict the shocking twist that awaited them both. The final day of the swap had arrived, and Tyler stood alone in the grand mansion, staring out at the sprawling estate that had once felt like a reflection of his success. The golden gates, the pristine lawn, the immaculate rooms. Everything around him seemed so hollow now. He'd spent the entire week grappling with the reality that had always been hidden behind the walls of his family's wealth. The life he'd once taken for granted now felt like a trap, a life he was no longer sure he wanted. He was exhausted, mentally and emotionally drained, and more uncertain than ever about what the future held. The thought of going back to the mansion, to the parties, to the endless stream of meaningless material things made his chest tighten. The luxury he had once craved now seemed empty, a mask to cover up the truth of what was really important. Victor, on the other hand, was standing in the parking garage, adjusting the valet uniform for one last time. It felt oddly familiar, yet completely different. He'd spent the last week living the life Tyler had once led, but it wasn't what he'd imagined. The wealth, the high-class events, the endless perks, they had all lost their shine. Despite the surface-level allure of that world, it hadn't given him the happiness he thought it would. He had felt more disconnected, more isolated than ever before. The people, the money, the endless consumption, it all felt like a never-ending chase. And now, as he prepared to return to his old life, something deep within him told him he couldn't just go back. He had seen too much, learned too much. He had seen how wealth can strip away a person's humanity, leaving behind only a hollow shell, consumed by status and image. With the final hours of their swap ticking away, both men were on the edge of a decision that would change everything. Tyler's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was his father, the man who had always been there to support him, guide him, and offer him solutions to every problem. The man who, just a few weeks ago, had handed him a brand new sports car and told him it was his reward for another successful year. But Tyler no longer wanted those rewards. He didn't want another material possession, another luxury item, or another lavish vacation. What he wanted now, what he truly wanted, was to reconnect with the real world, to stop hiding behind the walls of wealth and actually make a difference in people's lives. He let the call go unanswered, and in that moment, he realized that his life was his to shape. He wasn't his father, and he didn't need to follow in those footsteps. Across town, Victor sat down in the small, worn-out apartment he had once called home, reflecting on everything he had experienced during the past week. He had seen the emptiness that came with wealth, the disconnection it caused, and the loneliness that was masked by expensive clothes and flashy cars. It wasn't a life he wanted, not at the cost of his own soul. Yet, as he thought about the life he'd left behind, he realized it wasn't perfect either. The long hours, the endless struggle, the constant feeling of being invisible, it wore him down. What if there was a way to merge the two worlds? What if he could take the lessons he had learned and create something new, something that combined the best of both sides? Maybe he didn't have to go back to just being a valet. Maybe there was a middle ground. The two men, miles apart, both arrived at a pivotal moment in their lives. Tyler, feeling the weight of his decision, walked out of the mansion for the last time. He had made his choice. He was no longer going to be a part of this world of excess, of constantly chasing the next big thing. He was going to use his wealth and privilege to do something real, to make a difference in the lives of those who, like Victor, had to work tirelessly just to survive. He was going to open a non-profit, focused on giving back to the communities that had always been ignored. Tyler had learned that true success wasn't in the number of zeros in his bank account, but in the positive impact he could make in the world. Victor, meanwhile, was having his own revelation. He wasn't going to return to his old life either. The simplicity of his apartment was comforting, but it no longer held the same meaning. He had learned that true happiness wasn't found in the material world or in constantly striving for more. It was in connection, in real, genuine human interaction. He decided to start his own community organization, one that helped those in lower income jobs find ways to improve their skills, build relationships, and eventually rise above the cycle of poverty. He would teach people that they were worthy, no matter their job or background, and he would show them how to reclaim their own power. By the end of the week, both men had come to a place of clarity, having gained insights that changed their entire perspective on life. The swap, which had started as an experiment, had turned into a journey of self-discovery. Tyler had learned the value of hard work, humility, and the power of empathy, while Victor had discovered that true wealth wasn't something you could buy. It was something you had to earn through your actions, relationships, and how you used your influence in the world. Their paths, once completely separate, were now intertwined. Tyler was ready to use his resources to help others, and Victor was determined to give people the tools to empower themselves. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about using what they had to bring real change, to close the gap between the worlds they had experienced. In the months that followed, the two men kept in touch, helping each other along their respective journeys. Tyler's nonprofit took off, providing financial assistance to those in need and opening job training programs. Victor's organization also grew, giving countless people the chance to learn new skills and rise above their circumstances. And while they had come from completely different worlds, they had found common ground in the lessons they had learned and the people they wanted to help. Looking back, they both realized the swap had done more than just change their lives. It had opened their eyes to the truth that we are all more alike than we think, and the real key to a fulfilling life isn't in what you own or how much you have, but in how you treat others and how you use your position to lift them up. As the story came to a close, the world that seemed so divided began to feel a little smaller. And as Tyler and Victor looked to the future, they knew that the journey they had started together was only just beginning.